Hi, and welcome back to interview three with George P. Fanala. It's from here to hell and back. It's the story of the corruption of a state hospital here in Pennsylvania. And there's a lot that we would hope to cover, and I'm just going to tell you the update on the story. I wrote letters, and so did George, and holding our electors accountable for keeping the state hospital in operation. It was compared and is compared to Auschwitz, the type of mistreatment and the reforms that need to happen within the system. A lot of state hospitals and state programs fall to the wayside, and that's the story of Farview Hospital. And by writing letters, I hope that by before June 2nd, 2020, we hold our electors accountable for what happened up there and in prisons and also foster care programs where children were sexually abused. And I believe that between now and June 2nd, we have a chance to listen to the what the candidates will say and the possible elected officials will do to make sure that this never happens again. So now I'm going to introduce again George P. Fanilla from Globe, Arizona, and he's going to respond back to what the letters and the justice system, what happens from here, and what he wants to see happen. And just as a retrack of what happened in the interview yesterday, we had contacted the Department of Justice, and we are starting the legal process of clearing George Fanella's family's name. All right, George, welcome back.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. It's nice to talk to you again.
Yes, it's nice to talk to you too, and I think you have a lot to say, so go ahead. You have the
Well,
mic.
I certainly do. I'm a strong believer in optimism all my life. The reason my book is labeled From Here to Hell and Back, there's a significance to that title. A book I've written over the virus shutdown about my life story is that no matter how many times I've been adversely impacted, I've always managed to somehow come back. So I've lived by the theme, all's well that ends well. And I want this to end well by having the cooperation and the help of various state agencies to not only clear my father's name and, and apologize for what was done to him, and any rightful compensation consideration would be greatly appreciated to make this right and to make right the reputation of Wayne County and the state of Pennsylvania, which, a lot of people have been stained by what happened at that facility, that so-called mental hospital for the criminally insane. Thousands, and my family and my children, not only them, but the entire state of Pennsylvania has been impacted by this. When an atrocity like this, an Auschwitz-like environment is created, it has so many rippling effects that go so far beyond for so many years. And it really, an evil like this never goes away. I mean, we are still 70-some years later, after in World War II, talking about the Third Reich and the horrible things that were done in Auschwitz and places like that. So it never goes away. And this will never go away unless it is correctly addressed. And that is the effort that we are making to make sure that not only for me and my children, my family, and my family name, but for the entire state of Pennsylvania, which I grew up in and got educated in, that they are cleared, that they offer just compensation, just restitution, apologies, and even the Soviet Union had the guts to address Stalin's crimes. If you will look back in your history, so this is a therapeutic thing that must be done. It's not an option. And
Would,
sooner or later, whether it's done in my lifetime or 100 years from now, this issue will still be a festering wound on the table of Pennsylvania. So the sooner it is addressed, the stitch in time saves nine. Because the longer this is allowed to go on, the greater the magnitude of the damages that will be sought, I believe. Because the more people who have been indirectly affected by this will come forth.
and this
So,
takes and this takes
go ahead.
nothing away from real victims who've been real crime victims, because I'm a crime victim and survivor. This is something totally different. What the story really is about is that it was used, it was a state hospital that was used as a prison, and they used it as a work camp. They didn't even, um, as you stated, they didn't pay your dad for any of the services your dad provided while incarcerated.
For many years. They did eventually, they were shamed and detained him later, but for many, many years, he and other inmates were paid nothing. And they made bricks and they farmed crops, so they did a lot of things. And I guess they were terrorized into working. I mean, can you imagine being an inmate in there and you're being terrorized daily and you're supposed to work for nothing?
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine the environment that was in there where even if somebody came to visit you, they were probably told, we don't want to hear you say anything bad about our institution or you'll pay later, and in a brutal way. So these inmates, these patients were never given proper therapy, medical care, and I believe, in my opinion, that they were probably terrorized into not saying anything if anybody visited them, and then they were terrorized into working for free. Because who wants to work for free? I mean, these men were not stupid.
Well, the state hospital alone wasn't just the only place where atrocities happen. And you said it best that Pennsylvania is living with a dark stain. This is one of the darkest stories that Pennsylvania, when the more it exposes the prison reform system that goes on in foster care. Foster care is not a prison. And what happened at Holy Family and what's happened is they were literally treating children like prisoners. And I was telling you, George, remember that story yesterday about that black hole? And we were underneath this black hole and we saw you in this. There was a light in the hole, and there you were pulling us out of this hole as little children. And I saw that vision of that, and I've had experiences about this hospital where this occurred in Wayne County, that the best only way is to hold elected officials accountable for why they kept that place open. That place is like Auschwitz, and you were talking about your dad, the way he got mistreated, and how you are going to get justice by even having a letter of an apology is a good start. Like, what we're saying is, now that we're going into the primary here, between now, of course, Memorial Day weekend begins, because today's Thursday. This is a good time to see, between now and June 2nd, what elected officials will do to never let a system ever become a prison for really innocent mentally handicapped victims. Your dad literally had a lobotomy, is what you said.
Yes. Let me say something, Jennifer. One of the things that inspired me to write my book, From Here to Hell and Back, The Life and Times of G. Paul Fanala, alias Doc Holliday, and Sundance Kid, which I portrayed in my career here in the West, was the story of Anne Frank. Now, everybody knows what happened to Anne Frank. She and her family hid in an attic for years before they were captured, and she was executed in Auschwitz. But because of her diary, that little book that was found when they cleaned that attic, she became famous throughout the entire world and for all time and eternity in history, human history. Well, this parallels, and that was the inspiration for me to begin when this virus hit and this lockdown. I sat down and with a fine tooth comb and wrote my life history from when my people came 120 years ago from Austria to this country and my life and what had happened. So it goes to show you that when injustices are done, no matter how long ago, the story of Anne Frank was 1942, and here we are. She is still inspiring a guy like me to write a book, a giant book on the scale of War and Peace by Tolstoy, and to have this interview with you at my age now, my late 70s, to try to correct an injustice. So this has legs. This story has legs, much like the Diary of Anne Frank. And everybody knows the story of Anne Frank because of her diary. And everybody will know this story because of my book and these interviews, I am hoping. So this has to be addressed. It can't be swept under the
No,
rug.
it cannot be.
Can't be ignored
It cannot
any longer. It has to be addressed. Everything has to be put on the table, the records, the apologies, the compensation. If it's considered to be just, and I think it will be, slave labor actually was outlawed, I believe, in 1865. And my father and many, many men were victims of slave labor in that facility. And their survivors should be compensated just as the blacks. There's talk about restitution for them, and the Japanese Americans were compensated.
Yeah.
This is no different. And this story needs to get out, and we need to walk proudly. The name Fanala should be held up for what it really is, a proud last name. My daughters should know that they come from proud stock, capable, intelligent, hardworking people, not anything to be ashamed of.
It really harmed it really harmed your family. And
yeah.
what I was going to ask you, a letter from the state, like the state assembly, like if they were to address it, because there's other things that are going to happen today between the Justice Department about how humane treatment and poverty and the conditions in which they lived in. Um, there are a lot of things to address about poverty in Pennsylvania. This was not only impoverished conditions, this was slavery. And there have been a lot of comparisons to World War II, like uh, tactics, is as you would put it, like the lobotomy, um, the chemical the chemical lobotomy, and
right.
and that's what concerns me most is that if this isn't addressed, then it could happen again.
Oh, I'm sure it could very easily to anybody. If they could do this to him, they could do this to anybody. I mean, this is what went on with the Soviet Union. If you didn't go along with the program, you were committed to a mental hospital, and they had their way with you, and you came out only a shell of your former self. Your family didn't even recognize you. You just had this blank, faraway stare in your eyes, and I saw that in my father's eyes when I saw him. His brain was just a vacuum. They had completely destroyed his brain. I mean, what else can you do to a human being that's more horrible than to have them live a walking death, where they don't understand anything, they don't remember anything, they can't think. All they can do is put one foot in front of the other and lope along like a pathetic zombie. Now, I want any of these state legislators to imagine one of their children, one of their relatives, one of the people they love in this condition that would have been done with the power of the state, of like Pennsylvania, having that done to their relative for no good reason, unjustly. And I would imagine the emotions that would rise up in them, how they would feel about seeing their loved ones, their child, their brother, their father, treated like slave laborer in Nazi Germany.
And
Used and abused, worked to death, and then thrown on a garbage heap like they were just old fish or something we thrown out.
well,
So this
we're
is
almost at the end of the interview, and what I want is you got a minute about what you finally what justice will look like in the form of a letter from the governor's office to the Justice Department in Washington, D.C. Those are two examples, like how I would look at it. What would you want for this as we wrap it up?
I would like this. I would like, of course, at a minimum, a letter of apology in writing. I would like strong consideration of compensation for his slave labor to me and my children, particularly my children and grandchildren. And I would like to be invited to appear either telephonically or in person at their expense at one of their hearings to testify about what I know and what I found out, what I've experienced about this matter, because I think that somebody who has personally experienced the hardships, the rippling effect of such a tragedy, can lend real reality and emotion to this argument. It's not just a technical legal argument anymore. It's a human argument, and it will resonate with the residents of
Oh
Pennsylvania and
yeah,
the voters that this is a real deal, and it must be addressed comprehensively, fully, and no stone left unturned in considering compensation, apology, representation, and publicity.
thank you, George, so much for your time. I want to also thank you because I this would bring out a ton of new voters to the whole like I would just say that a lot of new people would be um on board with what you're doing because they are concerned about the same kind of conditions that and there is always been a future fear that a state hospital or any state system where abuse occurs would go ignored or it would go unrecognized or and mainly ignored. And what we're doing is we're saying before the primary, we are going to want an answer from the potential candidates that are going to be running in the general election in November. And I think by what we already stated, I think that there's going to be answers that we finally are gonna get. So thank you,
Amen.
George.
Amen.
I hope what we accomplish, George, is a beginning step for you mostly. And my heart is aches for the children and adults and elderly who were treated like as if they were in a work camp. And I hope that by the as we close up, we got about 1 second left. I just want to thank you for doing what you did by telling your story.
Wow. Well, I want to thank you as well, Jennifer. Right authorities to be addressed is an amazing testimony, isn't it?
It is. And what you stated was very powerful. Most people wouldn't be able to sit through an interview without crying. I mean, my eyes were, I mean, tears were pouring out of my eyes. Because this is exactly what I think everybody would fear that someone would be falsely imprisoned or imprisoned and mistreated horribly. It is a human rights violation as well.
Believe me, Jennifer, I cried all my life over this. I
Oh
shed
my
many
God.
buckets of tears, and now I'm at the point where I'm wiping my eyes and pinning my ears back and rolling up my sleeves and saying, before I pass on, I am determined to seek justice, to do all I can to bring this to the right people's attention and redress the wrongs that have been done to the Fanala family, in particular my father, myself, my children, my grandchildren, and so on.
And
And
we
the state
did
of
that.
Pennsylvania.
We began that process yesterday. This is a journey, George, and I just want to thank you again. We're going to wrap it up here. Thank you so much. For those of you who support what we're doing is that we are addressing what what unfair work conditions might look like to some people. This was a state hospital, and to see somebody in prison and for the community to look the other way, we're holding the officials accountable this time because we can't we know that this did happen and it should have been shut down if anything, and we want to thank everybody who supports George Fanala and their family who've been through a horrific ordeal. Thank you, George.
Thank you, Jennifer.
God bless.
God bless you, and God bless the great U.S.